Namaste and welcome back. In this series, we're going topic by topic through one of the highest weightage sections in the EPFO APFC exam, Industrial Relations, Labour Laws and Social Security in India. And we're starting today with the foundations of industrial relations. Now, this section looks simple on the surface, but most aspirants lose marks here because UPSC loves testing precise definitions, exact theory names, and who proposed what kind of questions. So stick with me till the end, because by the time we finish this episode, you'll have a rock-solid base for everything that follows in this series.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is industrial relations? Most people think it's just the relationship between an employer and an employee, but that's incomplete. Industrial relations is actually a triangular relationship. It involves the employer, the employee, and the state. The state isn't just a bystander here. It regulates, it legislates, it intervenes when things go wrong. This covers everything from wages and working conditions to disputes, negotiations, and worker welfare. And the ultimate goal of all of this? Industrial peace and productivity. Remember this triangle: employer, employee, state. Because UPSC often frames questions specifically around the government's regulatory role, and candidates tend to forget that third party.
Now, let's quickly run through the objectives of industrial relations. First, maintaining industrial peace so that production doesn't get disrupted. Second, establishing industrial democracy, meaning workers get a voice in decisions that affect them. Third, raising productivity, because a happy, well-managed workforce produces more. Fourth, improving employee morale and welfare. And fifth, minimizing conflict through dialogue rather than confrontation. Keep these 5 points in mind. They come up as direct one-liner questions sometimes.
Let's now trace how industrial relations evolved in India. And I want you to really lock in this timeline because we're going to keep coming back to it in later episodes. It starts in the pre-independence era, under British rule, with the factory system and India's very first Factories Act in 1881. Then, in the 1920s, we got the Trade Unions Act of 1926, which gave legal recognition to trade unions for the very first time. Right after independence, in 1947, came the Industrial Disputes Act. This became the backbone of India's post-independence labor framework. Then, from 1991 onwards, with liberalization, there was a clear shift away from heavy protection and toward flexibility and contractualization of labor. And finally, in 2019 and 2020, the government consolidated 29 separate central labor laws into just 4 labor codes. So here's a simple way to remember this. Before 1991, the approach was protection-heavy. After 1991, it became efficiency and flexibility focused. That conceptual shift is exactly the kind of thing UPSC likes to test.
Now, let's get into the theories, and this is where most of the exam-relevant content sits. First, the Unitary theory. This theory sees the organization as one big team, working toward one shared goal, almost like a family. Under this view, conflict is seen as abnormal, something that shouldn't really happen if everyone's aligned. It's a very management-centric way of looking at things. Second, the pluralistic theory, and this one takes the opposite view. Here, the organization is seen as a coalition of different interest groups. Management, unions, and employees, each with their own priorities. Under pluralism, conflict isn't abnormal at all. It's expected, and it's managed through negotiation and compromise. So remember this contrast. Unitary says we're one family. Pluralist says we're different stakeholders, and we bargain.
Moving to the next 2 theories. Third, the Marxist, or radical theory. This one goes even further than pluralism. It sees conflict as something built into the very structure of capitalism itself. It frames industrial relations as a class struggle between capital and labor. And fourth, the systems theory, proposed by John Dunlop. This is a classic name to remember because UPSC sometimes directly asks who proposed this theory. Dunlop described industrial relations as a system made up of 3 actors: management, workers, and government, operating within a certain context and bound together by a shared ideology. The output of this whole system is the set of rules that govern the workplace. 4 theories, 4 different lenses: Unitary, Pluralist, Marxist, and Dunlop's systems theory. Make sure these names are locked in.
Let's shift now to understanding India's labor force itself. It's broadly divided into two categories. First, the organized sector. This is registered, regulated, and covered under formal social security schemes. But here's the surprising part. This sector makes up only around 10% of India's total workforce. The remaining 90% falls under the unorganized or informal sector, workers without formal contracts and largely without social security coverage. And in terms of which sector employs the most people, agriculture still leads, followed by services and then industry. That 90-10 split is a statistic you'll see quoted again and again in this exam, so make sure it's second nature to you.
Now, a quick look at the institutions that govern labor in India. At the top, we have the Ministry of Labor and Employment. This is the nodal ministry for everything we're discussing in this series. Then there's the Labor Bureau, which handles data and statistics on employment and labor trends. We also have central and state labor commissioners, who are responsible for enforcement on the ground. For dispute resolution, there are industrial tribunals and labor courts. And internationally, India is connected to the ILO, the International Labor Organization. And here's an interesting fact. India was actually a founding member of the ILO, all the way back in 1919, the very same year the ILO itself was established.
All right, let's do a quick recap before we wrap up. Industrial relations is the relationship between the employer, the employee, and the state. We covered four major theories: Unitary, Pluralist, Marxist, and Dunlop's systems theory. We looked at India's labor force, where roughly 90% works in the informal sector. And we traced how the labor codes, since 2019 and 2020, have completely reshaped India's legal framework around labor. In our next episode, we're going deeper into trade unions, industrial disputes, and collective bargaining, which builds directly on everything we covered today.
That's it for today's episode. If you found this useful, hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this series, and drop a comment letting me know which topic you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video.